I'm overwhelmed with the recognition, and I do appreciate that very, very much. To be honest, I skipped my graduation at Elon, and so this is kind of like having that moment. I was busy. I went to IBM, and I didn't have time. So it was a phenomenal thing to come back and be a part of this, and I just want to say thank you very much. I understand we have in the audience a combination of business school as well as computer CIS discipline, essentially. And I think it's a wonderful chance for me to talk to two of my passions as opposed to just one. I honestly believe that the separation between companies' strategies and IT execution is zero. There is no difference anymore. And so there's not a single strategy that a company can choose to pursue, whether it's in operational efficiency, or whether it's in marketing prowess, or whether it is in sales, or whether it is in any of the back office disciplines that can be done without IT execution. And that's a pretty phenomenal thing. And what it means is the use of technology and the pioneering applications in the use of technology and the leadership responsibility for business executives are two disciplines that any young person coming out of school absolutely needs to understand if they want to pursue a career in either with either as a base background. And so I'll give you a couple of proof points to that, and then I want to talk a little bit about the technology side and a little bit about the business side. But in my career, I've had the opportunity to work for three founders. When I went to Frito-Lay, Herman Lay was still alive. And Herman Lay was a pretty interesting guy. He wasn't working any, he had kind of moved on, but he still came to the office. And when I talked to Herman, I had the opportunity when I worked for IBM, Frito-Lay was an account. I said, well, what is it that, you would advise? And he said, never let one of those MBAs talk you into building a warehouse. He called anybody who graduated from college an MBA. And so, I asked, well, why? And he said, because nothing good ever happens in a warehouse. Really? Yep. Product gets broken, product gets stolen, product gets stale. Don't do it. Figure out a way to automate the speed of this company to such a degree that we don't need them. This guy was 82 years old, didn't have a clue what a computer could do, but absolutely knew that without him, he couldn't generate the velocity that was necessary to win in the marketplace. So I learned from that experience, and that was pretty cool. And then I've had the wonderful opportunity while we kind of skipped it in the bio. I sold the Feld Group to EDS, and when I got to EDS, it was kind of a mess. And usually when you walk into a place that's a mess, you got to go find the core roots, the core DNA of the place, because it's in the DNA of the place that you can find the answers. You can't change the DNA except over a very, very long period of time. You come to Elon, there's a DNA of Elon. We called it emergence, sort of hands-on learning or immersion. Well, that's pretty important. The 5 major disciplines that are a part of the learning of Elon. That's part of the DNA. 4 of them have been here for a long, long time. Well, at EDS, Ross Perot started that company. And Ross Perot, actually worked for a competitor at the time. He had started his own business called Perot Systems. But when I called Ross and asked if I could come meet him, his love for the business and for the people caused him to overcome competitive things and sit down and talk. And he said, you know what, the difference in this company will always lie in the people. If you don't treat the people right, you have no chance of success. And then he went on to talk about how the people could be successful. And again, he began to relate this to the fact that they need enough rules that they kind of know what needs to be done, but enough autonomy to be able to do it unbelievably quickly without having to come back to the mothership for permission. Again, the core to that execution was technology. Having transparency between what they do and what we needed them to do. And then I had the opportunity to go to Dell, and Michael Dell is the founder. You know, we got there, it was kind of a mess. And we looked at what was going on at Dell, and we were losing market share, and our profit was declining pretty rapidly. We had kind of screwed up customer service on the consumer side. And you know, he hired me, and he hired a couple of other guys that joined the business, and we all came up with our strategies. And so I was running the services business at the time, and when I looked at the services business, I said, well, you know, there's a lot of things that need to change. We need to go to more of a SaaS type model. This was before there was a SaaS, versus a traditional outsourcing model, which is what I had come from at EDS. And I kind of knew the perils of the old way. I wanted to invent a new way. I had a colleague who was running the consumer business who said, we've got to start selling through retail stores. And I had another colleague who said, you know, we've got to reinvent the supply chain and fundamentally rethink the entire operational basis of the business. And this was a legendary supply chain. I mean, case studies and books have been written about it. And as soon as we step back to say, how are we going to do that? What we realized is we had so much complexity in the business that we couldn't get it done. And you'd say, well, how'd that happen? I mean, it's a simple business. And I realized, I went to Michael and I said, you know, what was this when you started the company? And so he was in his dorm room. You know, I grew up, what's the name of the one right across the way that nobody wants to live in anymore? Moffett. How you knew that? I lived in Moffett. I was the first class ever in Moffett. You know, this is the equivalent to being in Moffett. And you know, he basically, and I told the story to Matt, he basically started the business by saying, okay, well, IBM PCs are interesting, but they don't have hard drives. I'm going to put hard drives in IBM PCs and sell them. That's what he did. And he did that in his dorm room, and so he would he would go out and meet a customer. Customer would say, well, here's what I want. Michael would listen, and he'd, you know, put a color monitor on and the color graphics cards, drop in a hard drive, package all that up and ship it, you know, take it to the customer. Because he didn't have any money, he collected money for all of that before he bought any of the parts. And that was the beginning of the business model. And he started doing more and more and more of that. And then he started saying, well, you know, why do I have to buy the whole thing from IBM? Why don't I just go source that stuff myself? Because he knew where all the parts came from, and lo and behold, Dell was born. But when he really broke it down and said, what do? He said, I listen to customers, I design a solution to what they tell me they need, I build it, I ship it, I support it. And I said, well, what's different about that and what we do today? And at the time, the answer was not much. But we had self-imposed a level of complexity because every single country had their own way to do that, and every single general manager thought they had the authority to do it different. And as a result, we built up more complexity in the business than you could possibly shake a stick at. And he said, we got to go back and have one way that we do this around the globe. And again, our whole strategy was constrained by IT. And so you step back and you say, you know, there's this wonderful opportunity for us to simplify the world, I mean, the businesses and their execution dramatically from where they are today. And the people who built all the legacy stuff are not necessarily the ones who are going to fix it. It's more of a leadership challenge than it is a technology challenge. And the reason I started the Feld Group is because what we did is we basically went into companies and outsourced the leaders. We didn't outsource the people. They're not the problem. It's the leaders. And so we would go in and become the CIO and the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Development Officer. We'd stay for 2 to 3 years. We ran Coca-Cola, we ran PricewaterhouseCoopers, we ran Coors Brewing, we ran Delta Airlines, we ran First Data Resources and a number of other companies, all with that model. And basically what I learned through doing that is, go fall in love with the fundamental DNA of a company, figure out why that DNA is or isn't the right relevant base. Don't add any unnecessary complexity off of that base, and take advantage of enormous innovation that's happening in the technology side. And that enormous innovation couldn't be more real. It's never been more advanced or fast as it is now. Somewhere around here, I'm passing around devices. I don't, you know where they are? This is just a mobile device. It's a tablet. It's a Dell, 7-inch, like an iPad, but not an iPad, kind of a device. But what's interesting about these things is, every one of these mobile devices, and there's going to be thousands of them on the market over the next couple of years, and they're all going to look a lot alike, and they're going to have Android and Microsoft and Apple bases to them. But in the end, there's just going to be a huge proliferation of them. And what you guys do every day, whether it's Facebook or whether it's tweeting or whether it's using the camera and Skyping, or whatever kind of base applications you've become accustomed to, GPS information, those applications are finding their way into business in a way you can't imagine. We were talking at lunch about taking a picture of a check and making a deposit, right? I was talking to Boeing Airlines a few weeks ago, and they said they bought some of these, and basically what they do is they video corrosion on a plane. They stream that video back to experts at an expert center. They diagnose the problem. They download the manuals and the fix associated with that problem. Using presence information and social media, they're able to connect that person who's sitting at the plane to the experts in the field that have geographic proximity to the problem. They can figure out who's most available to come solve it. They can use the camera to scan the two-dimensional barcode on the part. They can therefore find all of the parts that are available to solve that problem and get planes back in the air faster. They didn't write any code. They used parts that are available in the web today. A little bit of integration, but it's not much. It's more business process around the same tools you guys use every day. And I'll bet you every one of you can figure out how to do that. If I sat you at a plane and gave you a device, you'd be figuring it out. So what's going to happen is there's going to be an explosion of new applications and new ideas that are made possible because of this kind of stuff, that businesses are going to have to harness to now take Ross Perot and Michael Dell and Herman Lay, God rest his soul, and add more speed and more efficiency to everything they do. And the ones who harness the power of IT are going to be the only ones that win going forward. You will not be, if you're caught up in legacy systems that have layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of complexity to them, you can't win because forget the cost. You cannot embrace change fast enough as an organization. No different than Dell took 3 years to unwind the mess in order to be able to start moving fast. 3 years since I got there because of the complexity we unnecessarily built. And so, you guys are going to graduate, you're going to move into these jobs, and you're going to have unbelievable energy because you can see the possibilities perhaps better than the ones who built them, built the systems that you're going to be tasked to support and manage. And I don't want you to ever give up on the energy and the passion that you hopefully have for unwinding the complexity of the business so that you can put speed against strategy. Because that separation is truly zero. And I think what's happening in the computer industry today, there's a few trends. How many of the CIS folks in the room? I'll apologize to the others if I go down a little bit of a rat hole, but I won't go too far. If you look at the IT industry today and go to, Dell is the infrastructure provider to 21 of the 25 largest clouds in the world. Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Yahoo, Microsoft, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba. I mean, you know, for those that are from China, those are enormous infrastructures. We literally ship orders of 100,000 servers at a time. Okay? Highly virtualized infrastructure. They have written code that abstracts all of the applications from the hardware. And they have employed techniques that go way past any data center that might be supporting Elon College or Elon University. I apologize, I'm dating myself. So what do they do? Well, essentially, there you go. Essentially what they've done is they have standardized to all, you know, x86 technology. They've optimized it for power and cooling. They've located these data centers next to the most efficient power sources in the world because the cost of power outweighs the cost of servers now. They've figured out how to support, you know, in a traditional data center. We were talking, you're doing an internship working with UNC Chapel Hill in their data center. Typically, you have one administrator for about 30 to good companies, 300 servers. Not Microsoft, Facebook is now 1 to 6,000. Think about the efficiency. Think about the automation, right? When a server breaks, they don't even slow down. They just vary it offline through the virtual software layer, and once a week, they collect all the broken servers and they take them to a room, and they pull out new servers and stick them into those slots and send the other ones off to either throw them away, because they've optimized to where it's actually maybe better just to get rid of them, and replace them. That's completely different than the way any company I know works. But that's the way 25 of the top 25 cloud companies work. Why is that important to this room? Because first of all, it's going to completely wipe out Unix. It's going to completely wipe out proprietary software stacks. We're moving to an open source, open world. There'll be exceptions with application stacks from Oracle and from SAP and from others, but it'll move more to a Salesforce.com delivery model than it does a traditional data center type model. CEOs and CFOs will look at those efficiencies and say, how come your data center doesn't run like Facebook's? If they can run at a power utilization efficiency ratio of 1.15, why is ours 2.8? And what does that cost me every year? If they can run with one administrator for 3,000 or 6,000 servers, why can't we do 1 to 1,000? And the expectation of what IT can do is going to change. And that's important, not only because it saves money. It's not just about dropping it to the bottom line, but it frees up resources. If you think about your budget, you spend, Dell spends $1.2 billion a year on IT. When you look at $1.2 billion, which is what we were spending 3 years ago too, 3 years ago, 94% of that $1.2 billion was being spent running the place and maintaining all the apps. That meant we had 6% of $1.2 billion to invest in our strategy. You can't do anything with that amount of money, anything of real substance. Now Dell runs all of maintenance and operation at 48% of $1.2 billion, and we are investing all of the other 52% in our strategies. Why is it important for you to be able to realize economics based on a new compute model that the cloud companies are cutting edge on? Because you're going to free up the capacity to run all these applications that I just described. And they're coming at us faster than we're cutting the costs. That's a great thing. It's a great opportunity for new talent to jump into the middle of that vortex and make a difference. And so, when I left Elon, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was fortunate enough to get a job with IBM. I actually got it. I wanted to get married. And so I figured I needed the job before I got married. So I took a job at Dun & Bradstreet, and I hated it. But it did give me permission to get married. And so it served its purpose well. I turned in an application to every single IBM branch office and every single Xerox branch office in the country. And so I got all their addresses. I found it all. This is before the internet. That was hard, by the way. And I sent an application to every single one of them, and I got a few hits. And I followed up those hits. I got married on I got married, and then my honeymoon was in Dallas, Texas, on an interview with IBM, and that's where I got the job. And so, determination to do what you have a passion for. The reason my dad was a sales executive, and I thought being a sales executive was great. And so I wanted to work for the best sales companies I could find, and those two were the best at the time. And as a result, of this sort of desire to learn and desire to understand and desire to hopefully make a difference, you can make any job you take your dream job. You've got to pick it in the right field. You've got to land it in an area. But no matter what your job is, if your job is in finance, then go figure out inside of your company where your company is on the spectrum that I just described between finance as a bottleneck and finance being a speed enabler. What would you have to do to change it? How can you write the thesis in that job that helps the company make the change? If your job is in sales, fall in love with your customers. They're the only things that matter. Understand their business better than they understand their business. After I met with Herman Lay, he's the guy who kind of inspired me more than anybody else, was after I met with Herman and he explained to me, this is an hour lunch, and he kind of walked through everything. I drew the Mr. Potato foil. We didn't use computers. We had acetate, and I drew it out with a marker. I went back to Mr. Lay. I said, is this the business processes of the company as you envisioned it? And he said, well, let me tell you that story. And he said, when I started this company, I bought potatoes, I sliced them in my kitchen, I fried them at my stove, I seasoned them, I put them in a brown paper bag, I wrote the price on them, I put them in the garage, and after a day of frying potatoes, I took the truck, I put them on the truck, and after a day of making potato chips, I drove them out to the store. When I got to the store, I asked the consumers that were there, did they like the potato chips they bought last week? And they said, well, they were a little too salty, they were not salty enough, they were too expensive, whatever. I asked the customer why they didn't sell, or when they sold out. And I took all that information in, and I went back, I bought potatoes, I sliced them a little bit thicker, I put a little less salt on them, I wrote a different price on the bag, and by the way, I put more in the store that sold out and less in the store that didn't, but I convinced them they needed to put them on the end aisle cap because they weren't going to sell on the bottom of the shelf where they had them. And he said it was the last time the CEO knew what the hell was going on in this business. Right? Because The entire information cycle was in his head. He was the computer. He understood every piece of information he needed to optimize his business. Now it's called BI, right? Now it's spreadsheets and analytical tools. And you got to go back to what is the model and what is the information that's absolutely essential to that model, and how do I get it in the hands of the people as fast as I can possibly get it to them, so that they can run a closed loop supply chain that has less than a day in it for some products, to Google that's less than a second in it. Think about how they monetize their business on search. How much is this search? If I type in pizza, as I stand here in this room, how much is that search worth to Pizza Hut? Not a whole lot if it's a national search. But let me tell you, what's the local best pizza place in Elon now? Domino's is the best? My gosh. Huh? Donato's. How much is that search worth to Donato's?
A lot more.
It's worth a ton. So what's Google doing? They're figuring out location-specific search, and they're pricing according to the local businesses who are best advantaged. Because Pizza Hut, you know, Pizza Hut's going to put the local Pizza Hut up against it. That's worth something to Pizza Hut, but they're not going to pay as much as Donato's is. So their information cycle is a few seconds at best, right? So fall in love with the customers, fall in love with the information cycles, fall in love with the business that you choose to be a part of. Figure out how to connect those dots and be maniacal about shrinking speed. It's the way the game's going to get played.